Thank you very much. I arrived this morning, so I'm still arriving. It will take me a while to really fully arrive. But I also got in this morning, and my luggage is still in Dubai. But one of the good things you have to do as an economist is you have to actually plan ahead. So I always have a blazer with me every time. So I always throw a bow tie into it. So that's why I can start here. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to be here. But it's good to be here anyway. Your Excellencies, distinguished honored guests, and Japanese business leaders, I wish to express my sincere appreciation to you, Mr. Yoshinori Yamashita. And thanks for your remarks. Mr. Mutsuo Iwai and Mr. Ken Shibusawa of Keizai Doyukai for your invitation for me to deliver this lecture on ways Africa and Japan can create a conducive ecosystem for investment mutually that works for both of us. Domo arigato. Let me also send my sincere gratitude to Mr. Ichiro Aisawa, Chairperson of Japan AU, Parliamentary Friendship Association. I saw you wanted to have precision, to be sure, but I'm delighted that we have Japan AU Parliamentary Friendship Association. Thank you for the support that you give us in Parliament in supporting the African Development Bank every time that our matters comes to Parliament. So thank you very, very much to you, Mr. Aisawa. And thank you to our moderator who will be talking about, I just saw him over there, Mr. Shimoda for Nikkei, as well as all the other distinguished panelists that are going to be joining us. And from the audience, I would like to thank and recognize Mr. Toru Oi, Director of MDB Division, International Bureau of the Ministry of Finance of Japan. Of course, my dear friend, Mr. Tetsuro Yano-san, who is the president of the Association of African Economy and Development and ex-senior vice minister of foreign affairs. And when I was campaigning for president the first time and campaigning for president re-election second time, he played a very big role. So please help me thank him for that. And we have with us Excellencies ambassadors out from Africa that are here. I know we have from Morocco, Egypt, Nigeria, Kenya, and Ghana. Please welcome them. Thank you very, very much. Your Excellencies, ambassadors, eminent Japanese and African business leaders, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Or afternoon, actually, right here now. I would like to thank you again, Mr. Yamashita, Mr. Iwai, Mr. Shibusawa of Keizai Doyukai for your kind invitation to be able to be here to speak to you and share some thoughts. This forum on Japan-Africa investment ecosystem is the outcome of conversations that I had with you, as well as with the Vice Minister of Finance, Mr. Kanda, during the TICAD 8 summit in Tunis last year. And we followed that up with Mr. Shibusawa when you came for the Africa Investment Forum. It's amazing that all this could come together in such a short period of time. I'd like to thank my vice presidents for being here with me. I came with a very powerful delegation to Japan. They all have good suits on because their luggage all came well ahead of time. But they can stand. Vice President Kwenya is Vice President for Private Sector of the African Development Bank. Vice President Kevin, who is the Vice President for Energy, Green Growth, Climate, anything that is kind of value chain on energy, that's the man that does it. Ken Karuki, and Vice President Beth Danforth. Thank you very much, who's in charge of agriculture, also human and social development. Thank you very much for joining me. I'd like to thank Mr. Takayuki Nomoto, the Executive Director of Japan at the African Development Bank. Where is Takayuki here? Yeah, he's doing a fantastic job. Yeah. And Mr. Hanajiri, also the director of the Asia External Representation Office of the bank. Thank you and your team for organizing this event for us. Arigato gozaimasu. Japan, Your Excellencies, is a strong supporter of the African Development Bank. It has always contributed significantly to the general capital increase of the African Development Bank. And it contributed very significantly to the 16th replenishment of the African Development Fund, which is a concessional financing window of the African Development Bank that supports low-income countries, 37 of them, all across Africa. Thank you very much, Japan, for your incredible support. Today, I am here to speak to you about investments in Africa. Now, whenever I am asked to speak about Africa, I am full of excitement and enthusiasm, and that's why they always call me Africa's optimist-in-chief. Now, regardless of what you've heard, Africa is the world's best investment destination now and in the future. The facts say it all. First, Africa has the world's highest demographic asset. The population of the continent will rise from 1.4 billion people today to 2.4 billion by 2050. Africa also has the largest number of young people in the world, with over 75% of its population aged less than 35 years old. With appropriate skills, they will form the labor force for global industries, as many countries face a rapidly aging population. Second, purchasing power is rising very fast in Africa. The continent has the fastest growing middle class in the world. It offers an incredibly immense market, with consumer and business spending projected to reach almost $7 trillion by 2030. And that's just 7 years from now. The recent establishment of the African Continental Free Trade Area, which covers 54 countries, makes Africa the largest free trade zone in the world in terms of number of participating countries. Manufacturing opportunities alone could reach $1 trillion by 2025. And Africa's consumer spending will reach almost $7 trillion by 2030. Third, Africa is experiencing the fastest growth of internet, which opens enormous opportunities for digitalization of the economies. Internet use increased by 44% between 2018 and 2022, the fastest rate in the world. The continent is witnessing a rapid expansion of fintech companies as they are radically transforming payments, money transfers, savings, credit, insurance, and marketing systems. The speed of change is simply amazing. The number of fintech companies, startups, has tripled, reaching 5,200 between 2020 and 2021 alone. It is projected that revenues of fintech companies could reach over $30 billion by 2025. Google and the International Finance Corporation, that's also represented here, I just met the representative here, estimate that Africa's internet economy alone could reach $180 billion by 2025. Think of it. And rise further to $712 billion by 2050. Does this sound like the Africa you know or hear about? I have more compelling facts on Africa. Fifth, Africa holds the largest sources of renewable energy in the world, including solar, wind, hydropower, and geothermal energy sources. With the drive for just energy transitions and focus on more renewables. Investment opportunities in renewable energy sector are enormous. That's also because, despite huge gains we have made in the last few years, and as African Development Bank, we've helped to support more than 30 million people to have access to electricity, yet close to 600 million people still lack access to affordable electricity. Africa also holds the key for the world as it transitions towards electric vehicles. You know a lot about cars here in Japan. The market size for electric vehicles globally is expected to rise to $7 trillion between now and 2030. And that could reach $46 trillion by 2050. The key for the success will be access to minerals and metals such as platinum, lithium, cobalt, copper, and graphite. Guess what? Africa holds the largest deposits in the world of all these green metals. The Democratic Republic of Congo alone accounted for 90% of the global supply of cobalt in 2020, while Zimbabwe, Namibia, Mali, among others, are leading sources for lithium. The manufacturing of lithium-ion batteries is most competitive in Africa. Take, for example, setting up a lithium-ion battery precursor in the Democratic Republic of Congo could be 3 times less expensive than in China or in the United States. Sixth, Africa holds, and this always gets me excited, 65% of the remaining uncultivated arable land in the world. And so what Africa does with agriculture will determine the future of food in the world. And the size of the food and agricultural market in Africa itself will rise to $1 trillion by 2030. So welcome to Africa, the place of incredible opportunities. The government of Japan recognizes the strategic importance of Africa, and there is a strong political will right here in Japan to promote investments in Africa. My dear friend, the late Prime Minister Shinzo Abe, may his soul rest in peace, announced a partnership for quality infrastructure in Africa at TICAD 5 in Kenya in 2015. At the TICAD 7 summit in Yokohama in 2019, a marked shift was made towards promoting private sector investments in Africa. And now, Prime Minister Kishida has upped the game in TICAD 8 summit in Tunis with the announcement of a $30 billion investment in Africa, including support for startups in Africa, for green growth and training well over 300,000 professionals from Africa. Your Excellencies, eminent personalities, ladies and gentlemen, Japan's business executives are strategically looking into how to further better position Japanese investments in Africa. Since its founding, Keizai Doyukai, over 74 years ago, it has been the platform for leading business executives, scholars, and policymakers to contribute immensely to promoting Japan's long-term economic growth and prosperity. Today, you are well positioned to now help tilt more Japanese private investments to Africa. There is so much to do. Japan's foreign direct investment stock in Africa declined from $10 billion in 2016 to just $4.7 billion in 2020 during COVID-19. But of course, that has recovered to $6 billion in 2021. But let me be clear. Africa still accounts for just 0.003 of Japan's $2 trillion global FDI stocks. There's also so much to do to expand trade between Japan and Africa. Africa's exports to Japan accounts for just 1.8% of the total global imports of Japan. And similarly, Africa accounts for just 1.3% of Japan's exports globally. Japanese private sector and businesses should be investing a lot more in Africa. Just listen to what the limited partner investors in Africa say. The African Private Equity and Venture Capital Association survey conducted in 2020 indicates that about 45% of limited partners expect returns in Africa to outperform emerging and developed markets over the next 10 years. And 60% of the limited partners plan to increase allocations to Africa in the next 3 years. Let me also say that Africa is not so risky as you may perceive. And here let me say a thing about swimming, because I learned how to swim pretty late in my life. I was president of the African Development Bank for 3 years before I decided to swim, because one of my staff told me, what if we went out and president and the boat capsizes? What happens to the African Development Bank? And so I thought it was a key person risk, and so I decided to teach, to learn how to swim. And I got a coach, a fantastic coach. He told me, you're going to go across this pool. I said, you're not serious. After 3 days of coaching me, he said, now you can go all across this pool. I'll be right behind you. You keep on swimming. If you sink, I'll grab you. Oh, that was kind of comforting, right? And so I started swimming. I started moving. And I got to the end of the pool. I kept hearing, don't worry, I'll pick you up if something happens. And I looked behind me when I got to the end, and he wasn't there. And I started sinking just at the end of it. What I'm saying is, if you know how to swim, the deep end of the pool doesn't scare you. So the point is, know your market, know the place, have people on the ground, understand it. Perception is not reality. In 2020, Moody Analytics looked at the rates of infrastructure debt defaults across the world over a 10-year period. What did they find? They found that Africa has the second lowest cumulative default rate in the world after Middle East, while default rates are much worse in Eastern Europe, Latin America, and Oceania. Therefore, investing in infrastructure in Africa is solid, secure, and profitable. Your investment is safe in Africa. Just ask Komatsu, whose businesses in Africa generated $1 billion in 2022. Just ask Japanese Bank for International Cooperation and Mitsuo Bank, which together with the African Development Bank and 9 other financial institutions invested $2.7 billion to build the Nacala Corridor railway and port project in Mozambique. And it works. Just ask Toyota Shusho, whose investment in automobile factories in South Africa generated $7.5 billion in revenues in 2022. I was there today. And the executive vice president told us that their gross profit from their African entity was roughly about 24% of their total group gross profit. Or you can ask again the bank, the Japanese Bank for International Cooperation, which together with Total and other investors, including us, the African Development Bank, co-financed the $24 billion liquefied natural gas project in Mozambique, which will make it the 3rd largest in the world, and for which Japan will buy 30% of its total production. Or you can ask Mitsubishi Corporation or Hitachi, which has been invested in energy in Africa since the early 20th century. They will tell you investing in Africa pays. The successes of large Japanese companies are now spurring a new generation of young Japanese to turn their eyes to venture capital and private equity funds in Africa to support small and medium-sized businesses. The number of Japanese companies in Africa increased from 520 in 2010 to 900 in 2020. This is very exciting development. Let me say a few, because I was just with them, as Mr. Shibusawa was saying, just across next door here, just before coming here. In Ghana, Degas Limited, a startup company established in 2018, is supporting farmers with satellite data analytics. Keppel Africa Ventures, another startup, has raised $43 million and is investing along with African private equity funds in 100, think about it, seed stage startups in 11 African countries. They hope to raise a fund size of $100 million by 2023. I met a young man who runs what's called the Uncovered Fund, founded only in 2019, as yet another example of Japanese venture capital fund that has invested in 26 African startups. Ladies and gentlemen, Africa needs more venture capital and private equity funds to tap into its huge potentials and to unlock them. That is why I want to applaud my dear friend, Mr. Ken Shibusawa, for paying attention to that issue, and together with Keizai Doyukai. They have put together and they have launched a $100 million impact fund for Africa, which you actually call AND Capital. And since it's $100 million and you call it AND, I suppose we can always add things to, right? Yeah, you can keep on going to $10 billion. The African Development Bank is excited about this work. Thank you very much for your leadership, Keizai Doyukai and of Ken. And we will be an anchor investor in this particular fund. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, there is now, I feel, greater pulse and excitement for more Japanese private sector investments in Africa. You can feel it. I felt it just before walking here in the room next door. And that's because, over years, the Japanese International Development Agency, JICA, has been doing an incredible work in partnership with the African Development Bank on what is called the Enhanced Private Sector Assistance for Africa, called EPSA. They have been working with us and they have made cumulative contributions of $5.2 billion towards EPSA in supporting private sector in Africa. Please, let's thank JICA for that. All these things have been laying the right foundations. I was very pleased to read a survey recently done by the Japan External Trade Organization, JETRO, on what you all feel about investing in Africa. What did they find? They found that 48% of Japanese businesses indicated they would like to expand their businesses in Africa. That's fantastic. 45% would like to maintain the scale of their business operations in Africa. 46% see the African consumer market as promising in the future. I will only add now and in the future. And 43% indicated they are willing to invest more in infrastructure, natural resources, and energy. That's absolutely fantastic news. Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, with such good news, I can only look forward to working very closely to Keizai Doyukai, Kaidaren, and other partners such as JICA, JBIC, JETRO, the Ministry of Finance, and the Ministry of Trade to further improve the investment ecosystem for more Japanese investments turning to Africa. Your Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, let's ramp up Japanese private sector investments in Africa. Let's do more together in Africa, faster and at scale. You can count on the African Development Bank. We are your partner of choice in Africa. Long live the partnership. between Japan and Africa. Thank you very much. Arigato gozaimasu.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, President Adesina, for your insightful speech. Adesina 総裁、大変資産ともお話をありがとうございました。ここで、相沢英雄議連会長はご公務のため退席をされます。大きな拍手。そうですか、大変失礼しました。はい、すみません。大変失礼いたしました。はい。それでは、質疑応答に移りたいと思います。総裁のご発言について、ご質問、ご意見がある方は、挙手をお願いいたします。ご質問は日本語でも英語でも構いません。マイクをお持ちいたしますので、よろしくお願いいたします。ご質問の際には、ご所属とお名前をおっしゃってください。オンラインでご参加いただいている方は、QA ボックスにご記入ください。それでは、ご質問、ご意見のある方はご自由にどうぞお願いいたします。
Thank you, Mr. President. My name is Alphonse. I am a jazz student sponsored by African Development Bank. I finished my studies last month. I've graduated in energy. I want to ask a question. I respect all protocol, please. I want to ask a question concerning Africa Impact Fund and clean energy investment in Africa. Africa is the greatest sun's influence. In fact, it's known as the sun continent. The annual sunshine duration is 4,300 hours, around 97% of the available hours. The best solar cell technology in the world's market is the newest Toshiba Corporation product, perovskite solar cell, with 25.5% power conversion efficiency, and it's predicted that it will have the lowest cost in the market, around $0.16 per watt. The potential market in Africa is more than 600 million people who are without access to electricity power, but willing to invest in available generation modes, and this means business. I therefore would like to ask how possible it is for partnership between Toshiba Corporation, Keizai, Doyukai, and Africa Development Bank in facilitating easy acquisition. In this way, I mean favorable, profitable payment terms and household installation of perovskite solar cells. To what extent can such partnership be transformed to a viable business which concurrently alleviates energy poverty in Africa? Thank you.
Oh, well, thank you very much, Alphonse, and congratulations on your finishing your degree. And let me use that opportunity to also thank the government of Japan for the program on policy and human resource development that you championed for us here, for which you've put in more than $43 million over time. You supported a lot of young Africans to come here to get world-class education. Many of them have come back to their countries doing great. And also I'd like to thank my executive director, Takashi Nomoto, for actually all of his work to actually make sure we can actually double support for that. Because your support for that used to be about $1.26 million. And now it's now about $2.6 million, which means that we can train about 25 more students every year. So thank you very much. Thank my executive director. He's doing a beautiful job for you at the bank. And quite honestly, I mean that with all seriousness, because when myself, I'll come back to your question. I'm not, I just want to say that when Ken and I met, and all the guys from Keizai, Doyukai, about planning this particular session, it really was on him to actually figure out how we're going to build this. And I was telling him in the car today that I was amazed that he and Mr. Hanajiri, the speed at which they work with you to make this happen. The African Development Bank is your bank, but you will see a lot better linkages with Japan when you have such fantastic staff like you have representing you, Japan, at the bank like these people. So thank you very much. But back to your point, Alphonse, we listen to the work of Toshiba and others. They have these new solar panel things, technologies, that is several times cheaper, it's a lot lighter, it's easier, you can put it on your building, you can put it in a car and things like that. So that's quite revolutionary. Of course, it's not ready yet in the market, we discussed with them. But what that really means is that we need to diversify the sources of solar panels globally, because we've learned from the COVID and everything else that concentration of value chains doesn't really help, right? Secondly, you need greater competition. You need a lot more innovation, and you need to drive down the cost. Now, when it comes to Africa, for example, if you take battery energy storage systems or you take renewable energy technology and components and so on, the landed cost is 3 times what you would get in anywhere else in the world. And so we have to find a way of bringing that cost down. I think the kind of innovation that I've listened to here from Japan and what you mentioned from Toshiba can be quite revolutionary in this particular area when it actually reaches the market. Now, as it thinks of reaching the market, you were talking about the sun, right? God loves Africa so much. We have so much sun. We have too much sun, right? In fact, as an economist, I think we should make sun a tradable commodity that we may be able to export it, right? So we'll be able to earn a lot of foreign exchange from there. But in all seriousness, we got 10 terawatts of solar potential, 10. And we're only using 1% of it. And that's more than enough to power ourselves and several other continents. And so that's why the African Development Bank, we're implementing something called Desert to Power. So Desert to Power, it's an initiative of $20 billion to build 10,000 megawatts of solar power all across 11 countries, including the Sahelian countries. And that will provide electricity for 250 million people. And when completed, it would be the largest solar zone in the world. Okay, but back to your question. How do we make sure that we can access solar panels and all these things at a lower cost? Just last week, I sit on the council of the Global Energy Partnership for People and Planet. And we're thinking of how we can do bulk procurement of battery energy storage systems so that you can have a lot more stability in the grid when you use variable energy, so that's like solar. And so one way in which the bank will work with this and any other is basically to make sure we do, first, try and do assembly on the continent to the extent possible. Move also to manufacturing on the continent. Third, to also make sure that we can have the technical capacity to maintenance, because that's also not just for solar, but also for wind. Maintenance capacity is very, very important, but also for concessional financing to reduce the cost of renewable energy to independent power producers, because access to concessional financing, blended finance, is what will drive that cost down. In fact, I will be very bold to say, as we think of energy transition, there has to be a way we can have differentiated pricing of loan products for companies that are driving green energy. Why not? You can provide financing to them at a lower cost because they produce global public goods or regional public goods that you want in terms of environmental positive externalities. So let me say that the opportunities are there, but it's not yet in the market. But if it's there, we're ready to be able to deploy it for large-scale projects.
Thank you very much, President. We have
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like first to thank your bank and also Keizai Doyukai for organizing this meeting and inviting us. I would like to come back to something you said and your swimming experience. You said...
You're going to make me swim again?
Yeah. No, you said exactly, know your market. Perception is not the reality. And they would like to come back to this. And through you, launch an appeal to the representative of Japanese companies. And I think I talk on behalf of all my colleagues. Most of the time, Japanese companies have information about our countries through the prism of representatives they have in other countries in the world, not directly in our countries. And as you said, sometimes perception is not the reality. So I would like here to invite all representatives from Keizai Doyukai and from Keidanren to come by themselves and visit countries in Africa and talk with Africans and see the potential there is and the low risk they are facing when investing in our countries. So please help us have Japanese companies visiting directly our countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Your Excellency. You know, since I have the microphone, I've just been given a responsibility to transmit his request. So I hereby transmit the request to you to do exactly what he said. But I just wanted to add one thing to what His Excellency said, the importance of having business opportunity seminars for private sector here in Japan. Where's Hanajiri? Yeah, I think we do quite a bit of that. We did a PPP seminar here, to which we had about almost 3,000 plus participants. We continue to do more of those things to be able to expand opportunities to people. But I also think that testimonies from those that are investing in Africa is the best, because if you're going to invest, the person that they're going to ask is the experience of the person who has invested. And so I think we need to do a better job of making sure that all these great stories of all these investors that have been in Africa for so long is actually also well presented all across to encourage more investments.
Thank you.
Your Excellency, our guest speaker, Your Excellencies, dear colleagues, let me join my colleagues in appreciating and thanking our guest speaker, His Excellency Mr. Adesina, for this eloquent presentation, and indeed, by extension, to thank the co-organizers for arranging this platform, to make this presentation. Mine is not a question, Your Excellency. I just want to touch on one critical issue you touched during the presentation, and that is to say the current desire of the African countries to see a lot more of investment in critical infrastructure. A lot of these countries, African countries, are constrained in critical infrastructure like power, like rails, roads, aviation, and indeed investment in agriculture. Let me acknowledge the intervention of Japan and the Japanese corporations in particular in the areas of rehabilitation, reconstruction, and resettlement efforts, arising from various challenges, witnessed by African countries. But we need more of critical investment in critical infrastructure because many of these countries are constrained in agriculture. So I'm indeed delighted to hear that in your presentation, you made mention that, and you made a call for Japanese corporations, to put in more investment in infrastructure in Africa. So we thank you very much for that call. And I hope the Japanese corporations, and indeed representatives of the Japanese government are here and they have heard that call. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Just a comment. Thank you very much. That's my ambassador, the Nigerian ambassador, Your Excellency. Thank you for being here. Thank you. Well noted. I just wanted to say something about infrastructure, just to say that we have launched what's called the Alliance for Green Infrastructure in Africa, which is a new alliance that brings together the African Development Bank, the Rockefeller Foundation, the U.S. International Financial Development Corporation, the European Investment Bank, European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, Joint Sponsored Development, and several other partners. And the whole goal basically is to green the entire infrastructure space in Africa, in particular the transport infrastructure. And green hydrogen will play a very big role, and I think Japan. I listened to some presentations today about the role that green hydrogen can play. I think it was, Suzuki, what is it? It's Kawasaki, yeah. I think Kawasaki did a great presentation today about the power of building green hydrogen markets. And I think that this is something that we will look forward to working very closely with Japan on, because that's the energy of the future for sure.
Thank you.